What's up, everybody? Tara Wellman here. It is series preview time once again as the St. Louis Cardinals head to Pittsburgh to see the only remaining unseen team in the National League Central. Now, both the Cardinals and the Pirates ended their previous series with walk-off winners. Nothing like a little momentum to combat a little momentum, am I right? The Cardinals enter the series 15-9 on the year, while the Pirates stand at 14-11. The Pirates started the year on a pretty high, and things have cooled off a bit since then. What that means for the Pirates moving forward, or for the Pirates in the moment, well, that is what Dan Hopper from the only Pittsburgh sports podcast is here to tell us. So Dan, thanks for joining me today. First of all, how are you after a walk-off win for the Pirates?
Somewhat relieved, still confused about the season so far. I feel like the first, 16 games of the season were like, maybe this team's a little bit better than we thought. And then the next 10 games were like, no, maybe it's worse than we thought. So I don't know how that evens out exactly, but it's almost the end of April and I feel like I'm much more confused about the Pirates than I was at the beginning of the season.
Well, let's go back to the beginning just for a minute to create some context, because this is the first time that the Cardinals and the Pirates will see each other in 2018. The Pirates made some, I would say, unpopular choices over the offseason as far as guys like Andrew McCutchen and Garrett Cole are concerned. What did you make of the Pirates offseason and sort of how they came out of this spring and how that created what were your expectations to begin with?
Well, unpopular would be a very mild way of putting it. Just people, whipping pitchforks at the foundations of PNC Park, maybe a little bit more accurate. But, the Pirates fan base has been jilted by ownership many times, even by owners in baseball being jerks standards. They are right at the top. So I think the fact that they came out of 3 straight years where they had winning seasons, they were the number 1 wild card, and once they lost in the first round to the Cardinals, and twice they lost the wild card game. And then the next year they really didn't add on to their team at all. And now 2 years later, they trade Andrew McCutchen and Garrett Cole, who were franchise building blocks, and McCutchen in particular, the most popular player in 30 years probably. So I think it was this public perception wise, it was this perfect storm of like, not only did they never do enough to like win while the window is open, but now they're also like preemptively shutting the window, and in weird trades. It's like, if they trade McCutchen and get 2 years ago, they were talking about trading him to the Nationals, and they were talking about getting, Lucas Giolito or like these top prospects. And if it was that, I think you could be like, all right, I could kind of understand it. But they traded McCutchen and Cole for a lot of major league ready or close to major league ready players. They got a bunch of relievers. They got Colin Moran, who's their third baseman now. They got a guy, Joe Musgrove, who is injured now but would be in the rotation. And they got 2 relievers who are in the rotation right now, or not rotation, in the bullpen rotation. And so it's like, it wasn't clear if they were rebuilding or trying to compete. And if you're trying to compete, why wouldn't you just keep Garrett Cole? And if you're trading him, why wouldn't you get some, farther away, higher ceiling prospects? And so it's this weird mix of like, you look at the roster and you're like, for a team that just traded its 2 best players, they're not bad. They're actually like, they have credible starting player. They have a credible starter at every position pretty much, but also they're not that good. They just seem like they are right in that 75 win range without much. If this breaks right, they'll be great room. It's just like, I think they'll probably be around 75 wins. And I still kind of feel that way, but, it was an exciting first couple weeks of the season for sure, but I think they're playing a little closer to their real talent level now.
Yeah, it was a little weird from an outside perspective, sort of watching the Brewers go out and do what they did in this offseason, really try to step their game up, and then watching as a Cardinals fan, the Cardinals make some changes, but maybe not quite as significant changes as the fans would have liked. And then for the Pirates, you're right. It does sort of feel like the initial part of let's move two of our best players feels like the start of a rebuilding process without the follow through that sort of creates the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. And like, I just don't know exactly what to make of the strategy. And I think their strategy is just sort of perpetually being competitive is their plan. It's not like we're going to tear it all down and then in 2021 we'll be ready, we'll be the Astros or something like that. It's kind of like we have too many good players to get rid of everyone, but not enough good players to compete, and obviously we're not going to spend. So it's just kind of like, well, let's trade 2 guys for 7 guys and just hope everything goes right in the next 2 years, that kind of thing. It's weird because I wouldn't say they're rebuilding now, and it's hard to say that of a team that just traded its 2 franchise players.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. I think the way that the season started, to your point, may have lent itself to the idea that, hey, maybe this math does work somehow. They took 3 out of 4 from the Reds, 2 out of 3 from the Cubs, and we now know that the Reds are really struggling this season, but the Cubs continue to be the favorites to win the division. So going in and playing well against that team has to lead you to believe that there's something there. So what do you take away from those early series victories as far as who this team is capable of being?
Well, yeah, again, it's confusing because the first, 15 games of the season, something like that, I think they had the #1 offense in baseball, including like in the American League too. And I think at that point, even as a real rational, skeptical fan, you're like, okay, I know they're not going to lead the league in scoring, but maybe the offense is a little better than we thought, like that kind of thing. And, maybe, Francisco Cervelli got off to a really good start. Corey Dickerson, the left fielder they got from the Rays, is off to a good start. Colin Moran, the third baseman they got in the Cole trade, is off to a good start. And you start to talk yourself into like, I know they're not going to be #1, but they might be better than we thought. And then they ran into these Rockies series and they got swept 4 games by the Phillies and were scoring, 1 to 2 runs a game against some good pitchers, some middling pitchers. And I feel like it corrected so far the other way. You're like, well, they're not this bad. And so I still think there's a chance the offense is going to be better than people thought at the beginning of the year. But I think there's been a little bit of a reality check these last couple of weeks. And it's also a situation where guys who, sometimes guys have like a good first series and in your head, you're like, oh yeah, Josh Bell, Gregory Polanco, they're having good years. And then you look at their numbers now and you're like, oh wait, like they just had a good game that I remember and have been struggling for longer than you think. So I think the offense is kind of stabilizing, but it might be league average, which would be much better than anyone thought coming into the season.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the curse of small sample sizes at the beginning of the season. It's easy to get too high or too low based on what you see in such a limited amount. Was there something you mentioned that Phillies series, was there something in that series that seemed to be like the issue? Was it a matter of strikeouts or of, something that flipped the script completely from what you saw in that first week or so of the season?
It was, yeah. I mean, it was just, teams get in those funks where they just do everything wrong. It's like, I just think it was not enough base runners, honestly. I think sometimes, fan bases will get caught up. It's like, oh, they had a runner on second and third and failed, and that's too, pass over that. And they're like, you got to bring them in from second, like that kind of thing. But, that happens all the time. And the way to, and if you only had one chance to score against, the Phillies, that's the problem, is like just guys having really bad at bats, striking out, not taking enough walks, really, 8 pitch innings, that kind of thing, which was the opposite of what they were doing earlier in the year. So this Tigers series, they just took 2 out of 3 from Detroit. In the game they lost, they still scored like 8 runs or something. So it was kind of a breather of like, okay, maybe they are, not the worst team that's ever been assembled like they looked against Philly. Every team looks like that at some point during the year. Man, baseball is really I feel like the most extreme sport of how you feel about your team from game to game. Whereas like when a team is not hitting, you're just like, I don't think they're ever going to hit again. I don't think they're going to score the rest of the season. They're going to break the record. They're going to get shut out 145 times in a row. Here it comes.
Yep. And when
then
you're
they just have a regular game, and you're like, okay, wait, it's regular. Yeah.
Maybe this is okay. This is normal. No, I was actually before the Cardinals first played the Cubs. I was doing the series preview for that series, and Corey from the Ivy Envy podcast was saying something to the effect of a lot of people were complaining about the Cubs not hitting with runners in scoring position, and his point was essentially, I'd rather have runners in scoring position and sometimes not score than to not have runners in scoring position, which I think is an overlooked point when you're watching an offense that is struggling to score runs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Because every team is going to have those moments where you get a guy on second with nobody out, and then they don't bring him home. Like, that happens more often than you think. But I think when you mostly you only focus on your own team, and when they don't get them in, you think that they have some like deficiency where you're like, oh, they don't play fundamental baseball, or they're not clutch or something like that. And it's like, no, that mathematically that happens all the time. You'll get, a guy on third with only one out and not bring him in. It sucks when it happens, but it happens to every team. It's not like, it's not like the Astros last year did it 95% of the time, or, they're so good at winning. Like, and so the way to combat that is constantly getting guys on base, constantly giving yourself a chance to score. And so that when you don't bring the guy in from third, that doesn't matter, because the next inning you just get another guy on third. And so I think their roster, they've got maybe 4 or 5 guys that are really hitting well to above averagely. And I think they've got a couple guys who now it's coming clear that are struggling. And so it's a little bit more of a mixed bag than it was the first 3 weeks of the season, where everyone was hitting and you're like, yay, this is going to be the best offense in Pittsburgh history. It's not.
not at this point anyways. You mentioned Corey Dickerson. Of course, he was the hero in the walk-off winner to end the series with Detroit. What does he bring to this team?
Well, the Corey Dickerson trade is one of the weirdest trades I've ever seen in my life. And as a Pirate fan, I've seen a lot of bad trades, but even in most of the bad trades, you could see why they did it, even if it was to cut payroll, which is a lot. And a lot of teams in the league do moves to cut payroll. But the Corey Dickerson got traded they traded Daniel Hudson, who last year was a sub-replacement level reliever. He was like negative value reliever who makes $5.5 million, and some infield prospect who wasn't one of their top like 30 prospects for Dickerson, who makes about the same amount of money as Hudson. So the Rays didn't get futures and they didn't cut payroll, and they gave the Pirates an outfielder hit 27 homers last year and was an all-star. So and he's under control for 2 more years at like $6 million, like totally reasonable for, a corner outfielder. So I have no clue what even like devil's advocate the Rays were thinking, unless this, the Pirates' 47th prospect is secretly the best player in the world, and in 3 years we're gonna be like, oh my god. But so the Pirates basically, they traded Andrew McCutchen, obviously. They moved Starling Marte to center, and they have Gregory Polanco in right. And they signed a bunch of random sort of fringy minor league free agents to play left field. They had Daniel Nava, who is like 35 or 36 or something. They had another guy from the Red Sox who had like okay power numbers, but it was not a starter ever. And a couple other, they 2 or 3 minor, quad A type guys who like hit well in their AAA system last year, but they're not major league players. And I think they were just going to mishmash them all together and see who hit well. And then out of nowhere, Corey Dickerson ends up on the team, and they don't even have to give up anything or raise their payroll. So now they have a left fielder who is right now their most valuable hitter. He's their best player on offense. He's a power threat. He's getting on base, left-handed bat. He's been surprisingly good in the field. I feel like the knock against him was he's a bad fielder, and left field in PNC Park is difficult because there's a giant notch in left center field. So it's Actually, it's much tougher than right field. I know left field's usually where teams stick the crappy outfielders, but in PNC Park, it's almost as tough as center field. And he's been great out there. He's graded out as their best fielder so far. So they basically got their most valuable position player so far this season for nothing, which is very helpful. Thanks, Tampa.
Yeah, that doesn't always work out that way, but when it does,
Yeah.
you just gotta hope they don't realize there was some flaw in the trade or something, and just,
Yeah.
no takebacks, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned Gregory Polanco.
Get back times infinity.
Yeah.
Damn it. Yeah.
You mentioned
he got us.
You mentioned Gregory Polanco, and to me, as a fan of a team within the division, I feel like he's one of the most critical pieces to the Pirates and the potential success that they can have, because when he's playing well, it completely changes the dynamic of that team. He's just not always playing well. So what do you make of Polanco and the start that he's off to this year, and sort of how he can make some of that success more sustainable?
Man, that I totally agree with everything you said, and I feel like that's the biggest question with this team, and has been one of the biggest questions for 3 years now. I feel like sports writers have been copy and pasting the same. Can Polanco take the next step? Is every spring training story for the last 3 years? They're like, just change the dates and Control F, and they're like, boom, spring training story. Like, because when he hits well, like when he hits a home run, he's this big, tall, like left-handed hitter, has this uppercut swing, and when he hits a home run, you're like, it looks like Ken Griffey Jr. He's the easiest player to talk yourself into irrationally. You're just like, oh my God, this guy's he's Griffey. Ken Griffey's back, and he's that guy. And but he's been injured a lot over the last 4 years. He's either missed time or played not completely healthy. And he really just, other than like a 2 to 2.5 month stretch 2 seasons ago, he just has not been healthy and productive and in the lineup for any length of time. And he's 26 now. So he's not, he's not old, but he's not young. He's not, 22. And then he's one of the guys who I was saying, like, I thought was off to a great start. And then you look and I think he has 5 home runs now and a pretty good slugging. And he's, his weighted runs created is like above average league wise, but he's hitting like 200 and into like 190 to 200. And his on base is maybe like 3, something like that, like 300. So like basically he's had a couple huge hits, but big long stretches of 0 for 4s, that kind of thing. So I mean, for him to be better, I think he just probably needs to stay healthy and make a little bit more contact and stay in the lineup more consistently. He also is a really bad fielder for some reason. I feel like, because he's very athletic and he's like a touted prospect, so you just assume he's a good fielder. And, he has all the tools when he's batting and stuff. And then you just watch him in the field and he's just takes terrible routes. He doesn't have a great arm and makes bad decisions. So hopefully he can make a little bit more consistent contact and then keep the power kind of where it is and end up having a good season and God forbid stay healthy.
Yeah, that seems to be, again, probably more common than not when you're talking about prospects and guys that are so highly touted as they come up at such a young age, and you sort of see what their ceiling is, but maybe not. It's not always a straight line from point A to point B, and that seems to be the way Polanco is. Now, I since you haven't brought it up yet, I feel like I'm contractually obligated to ask about David Freese. Because everyone will always and forever love David Freese. So what is the update on the 2018 version of the most favorite Pittsburgh Pirate coming into the Cardinals series?
Well, Freese, he's still a decent bench player. He's platooning at third base right now with Colin Moran is left-handed, so Freese will usually bat against left-handed starting pitchers, or will kick over to first base and play some first if they want a right-handed hitting first baseman. He doesn't really have any power anymore. I think he had like 10 home runs last year and 500 plate appearances, something like that. But he's still at a decent average, decent on base. So he's still a major league player. I know that's damning with faint praise. He's not just a guy who has great memories or something. But he's definitely a complimentary piece at this point. He's not his first year with the Pirates. I feel like he was one of the first guys to get squeezed by this, the thing we saw this past offseason with these mid-range free agents just having no market. It was like 3 years ago, he was unsigned into April and coming off, he was obviously great with the Cardinals, but he was quietly really good with the Angels too. He was an above average major league hitter at a power position. And he signed in April with the Pirates for 1 year, $3 million, something like that. So he was really one of the first guys to be like, oh, teams were going after elite free agents and using their internal guys, and those in-between guys started having no market. Now we see it's gotten worse than ever. So the Pirates snapped him up for $3 million, and he was great for them. He was really, really good. So they extended him for 2 years, and I think this is his last year under contract. But he's a fine complimentary piece. Everyone likes him. Made some comments in the preseason about the direction the team was going in, and which you're like, one, that's fair. Two, like, you're also a bench guy on a 73 win team. So, but yeah, everyone likes Freese, and I feel like the myth of him, like him hitting all those playoff home runs, I feel like almost makes you, sometimes like crappy players will do that and then they get mythologized forever. I feel like his playoff exploits have almost made you forget that he's been really good for 6 or 7 years with the Cardinals, the Angels, and the Pirates. He's been like a very, very good hitter. He's not some random bench guy who had like a one moment of glory or something. He's a good player.
Yeah, it was interesting watching him after he left the Cardinals, because in St. Louis, he had some good moments, but he was never particularly consistent. Had some injury issues there as well. And then, of course, the postseason glory of the 2011 run to the World Series obviously made him a legend. But I think it sort of clouded a little bit of the inconsistency that he did have at times. Then you see him go to the Angels and then with the Pirates and be pretty solid, as you mentioned, just a pretty solid guy to have around. And as a fan of David Freese, both the person and the player, I think it's great to see him be able to translate that success in a realistic way, not just in one particular postseason. So that's been nice to see. Now, changing gears a little bit, right before we recorded this, some news came out ahead of this series about Jung Ho Kang, who has been not in the U.S., not allowed in baseball, and has been granted a work visa, and intends to return to the Pirates. Now, there's a lot to that story, the DUIs and the time out of the States and all the details there. But the plan is for him to come back to the Pittsburgh Pirates. I guess, first of all, what is your reaction to that? And do you think that there will be any sort of lingering ill will towards a guy that was at one point one of the best players for the Pirates based on all these off-field issues?
I honestly, when I saw the tweet about that, I thought it was fake. I was like, what? And then I saw it confirmed a couple times and I was like, I think maybe they're all fake somehow. But it was, because I feel like Jung Ho Kang was not allowed out of, he wasn't given a work visa out of Korea for a while, and it was updated all the time. You'd hear about it all the time, and then heard nothing for the last year and a half. Like, I forgot. I just thought he wasn't in their plans for valid reasons, and then out of nowhere today they just announced he's rejoining the organization, which is very, very bizarre. And like you said, there's a lot to unpack there, because he has 2 DUI convictions. The second one was not just a DUI conviction. It was like a reckless driving where he like smashed over a divider and then like tried to blame it on his friend or something like that. It was like really bad. This wasn't, I mean, all DUIs are bad, but this was like exceptionally bad. And then also he was accused of drugging and sexually assaulting a woman 3 years ago. And I don't think anything ever came of that case. I think the plaintiff either dropped it or something, like it just fell out of the news cycle. And so there's all of those issues, which are not minor, like that's horrible. And that's the second DUI is why he wasn't able to get a visa for so long. so now all of a sudden he comes back and he's, not only you have, I hate using the term character issues because that's avoiding what he's committed, between 1 and 3 bad crimes. That's awful. It's not, I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I'm just laughing because it's like, sometimes it's like, oh, he's had his struggles, or so, people avoid saying what the things he's done. And then on top of that, you have a guy who's been out of baseball for 2 years. He played some winter ball in, I think, the Dominican last year and got released by his team because he just wasn't hitting at all. And now he's 31, and now he's going to come back into the organization. So you have like a guy who has plenty of off-field reasons why he should not be in your organization anymore, and then also might suck at baseball too. Not that you should make the exception for it, but it's also like I just don't even really know what they're expecting out of him. So I don't know, morbidly intrigued by how this whole thing's going to play out as anyone. But I mean, I had people on Twitter who are like, if he goes back to 2016, Gung, like, look out. And you're just like, I don't know. He hasn't played in 2 years. He's in his 30s now and was injured. And also he's a horrible person. Like, this is weird. It's a very, very weird situation to wrap your head around.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound like the return to the field will be happening anytime soon. There are a lot of hoops to jump through before it gets to that point. But even just, like you said, the announcement of it kind of, I think, caught everyone off guard. And you're right, there's a lot to work through there. Not only just as a human being, he has to work through all of that and convince the organization and his future and former teammates of his place in the picture going forward. But there's also like I mentioned, the respect and the response from the fan base that is looking at this as this very bizarre circumstance that maybe doesn't really help the Pirates be a better baseball team.
No. And I mean, we'll wait and see how it plays out. I feel like I'm sure they will PR spin it as like, he needs our support now more than ever, and he's trying to turn his life around and stuff. And you're just like, all right. Like, not that I don't have like sympathy for people, but like, I don't know. He seems like at the very least, he seems like a really awful person. Like, wherever on the spectrum of these things being true is, I mean, the Pirates team president also got a DUI 4 or 5 years ago, faced no repercussions because no executives ever do. But it's going to be weird, and I don't know. I mean, well, in Pittsburgh, we've had a decade of Ben Roethlisberger being our quarterback and no one knowing how the hell to reconcile that. So I don't know. At this point, it's just a lot of like, I don't know. It's exhausting, and I guess I'll go to the Double A and try to become a professional baseball player anymore. And then not to minimize the off-field concerns, but also I'm not entirely sure how he fits on the Pirates right now, because they have Colin Moran's their starting third baseman. Gung is a right-handed hitter. He could, if theoretically he suddenly was, a major league player again, he could maybe platoon at third base. I don't know if he would go to a middle infield position, something like that. But it just is. It's very, very bizarre on the field and off the field. So I don't know.
I feel like, for full disclosure, I should acknowledge that the Cardinals have had their share of issues with DUI situations in the past as well, and it is tricky. It's hard.
David Freese.
David Freese, yeah, as well as Tony La Russa, and it's challenging to figure out how you reconcile that with this idea that people deserve a second chance, and there are ways that you can overcome these things and become a better person, and all of that is true and great, but there are also you want there to be repercussions for people who do bad things in life. And that's a complicated sort of storyline to navigate as you're dealing with these people from a distance, from where we're sitting, as well as sort of hoping that everyone inside the organization handles it well. So it's very tricky, but definitely a bit of news worth noting as far as the Pirates are concerned. Now, missing on the field for a different reason, the Pirates are without second baseman Josh Harrison due to injury this season. So what has been the game plan to sort of fill his spot on the field as well as in the lineup every day.
Well, I think on top of that, I think they probably tried to trade Josh Harrison this offseason too. I think they plan to trade their high cost players who are approaching free agency, and also Harrison is probably a little easier to replace internally. But in the short term, they've been using Adam Frazier, who's a left-handed hitting second baseman, who is not a great fielder and actually has been hitting terribly this season. Last year, he hit, sort of decently for a middle infielder, but he's definitely been struggling this year. They've been using a combination of him, Sean Rodriguez, who is plays every infield and outfield position. They have a guy, Max Moroff, who is a switch hitting a middle infielder who's probably he's on the younger side. He probably projects as a future, backup middle infielder type. I don't think he's a top prospect, but they have a lot of middle infield depth in AAA and AA. They have They have a Kevin Kramer as a second baseman, a guy Kevin Newman as a shortstop, and a guy Cole Tucker who's a shortstop, who have been all three of them are top first and second round picks recently, who are now getting in the mid to high level minors. So I think in the short term, they'll keep using, Frazier, Rodriguez, and Moroff to replace Harrison. But I feel like if the opportunity arises, if they're out of contention and someone wants Harrison at the trade deadline, I think they would trade him and go internal. But he's a solid player. He makes a decent amount of money for the Pirates, but not for baseball. And he was productive last year. He's like a 2-win player, something like that. And he can, he makes good contact, has okay power. He's a decent fielder, good base runner. Actually, he's a crazy base runner. He's somewhat fast, but he is reckless. But everyone likes him too. He's a good clubhouse guy. So I don't think their sudden struggles to hit are related to Harrison. I mean, that's part of it. He's a good player, but I don't think he's so essential that all of a sudden they can't hit. I think that's kind of coincidental, but they're making do in the short term.
Well, offensive woes aside, let's talk a little bit of pitching heading into this series. We were kind of talking before we started recording this that some of the pitching numbers, whether it's the starting rotation or the bullpen numbers, when you look at them this early in the season, they tend to be a little misleading, and they can also be just as bad or just as problematic throughout the league as they tend to be with your own team. Bullpens can be a little bit volatile. Starting rotations, your starters maybe don't go as deep into games as they will later in the year. But as you look at this pitching puzzle for the Pirates this year, obviously without Garrett Cole as the ace of the staff, what do you make of the pieces they have put together and what has been working so far?
I mean, without instant Cy Young favorite Garrett Cole, just goes to the Astros and is like dominating. Yeah, that's extra frustrating because a lot of people who are smarter than I am, were pointing out that he wasn't really throwing many breaking pitches with the Pirates, and they're like, I don't know why he doesn't use his slider more. The Pirates seem obsessed with fastball, everything fastball, and then he goes to the Astros, starts throwing his slider like 20% more, and is like leading the league in strikeouts instantly. It's just like, come on, like these dudes online who I don't even know are like pointing out this obvious flaw, and then it immediately happens.
Someone has to have this information, right?
Yeah. So yeah, if they can just like look and be like, why don't they do this? And they're immediately right. You're like, what? So So the guy they got for Cole, Joe Musgrove, has been hurt all season so far. So they're using a guy, Stephen Brault, who is a left-handed pitcher. I think he's starting the first game of this series, and he's a very typical like 5th, 6th starter guy. He's like a slow-throwing lefty who doesn't get a lot of swings and misses.
Which is sort of the Achilles heel for the Cardinals lineup, by the way. Right. The soft-tossing lefty is the worst.
Yeah. We're just like, oh man, this guy's great. It's like you rip a single and then a foul home run, and you're like, oh, we're gonna kill this guy. And then you look up and it's the 6th inning, and you're like, what the hell just happened? Like, did I doze off? It's 0-0. Yeah, but he's been very, very bad. He has a bad ERA, and his underlying numbers are actually worse. He has like a high 5s fielding independent pitching or something. So like he could get blown up at any time. Jamison Tyon is their ace, although he has struggled. He pitched a complete game shutout a couple games ago, and his last couple starts since then, he has not looked that sharp. I don't know. I think it's simplistic to just say he's like fatigued from the complete game, but he hasn't bounced back immediately from that. They have a guy, Chad Kuhl, who has better stuff than you'd think, is maybe projects as a number 3 type starter. Ivan Nova, the veteran, went today and actually went 8 innings. He pitched 8 scoreless innings. He's also typical middle to bottom end starter. Not a lot of strikeouts, but can be reliable. And then who else is starting in the Cardinal series? It's Brault.
Williams, I believe, is going
Trevor
in game
Williams.
2. And then they had not announced game 3 as far as who the starter would be.
That's right. Yeah.
Sort of TBD. Probably, I would imagine, because of the doubleheader and the schedule the rest of the week.
I think it's going to be Nick Kingham. He's a AAA. He's probably their first AAA option. I think they'll probably call him up for a game. And he's sort of probably better stuff than Brault, but he's right-handed. He's sort of was a top prospect a couple of years ago, but had tons and tons he had Tommy John and then tons of injuries, and just last year got back into the mix. So they thought maybe he'd be the 5th starter coming out of spring training, but they gave it to Brault instead so he could go to AAA. So I guess he'll probably, I don't know if it'll be his first major league start if he comes up, but it'll be him. And then Trevor Williams has been fine. He's similar to Kuhl, probably less swing and miss stuff, but he's just he's a mid-rotation righty. One of the best follows on Twitter, definitely the funniest player on the Pirates. So that's a good X factor there.
Yeah, gotta love a guy with a solid social media presence to go along with his ability on the field. Now the Cardinals will counter with Miles Mikolas, who has been, I think, better than advertised in his return to the major leagues after some time in Japan. And then in that second start, it'll be Jack Flaherty, who will make his second major league start. He came up at the beginning of the year in place of Adam Wainwright, who started the year on the DL. Adam Wainwright once again on the DL, and Jack Flaherty will make that start against Trevor Williams. And then in game 3, it should be Luke Weaver going for the Cardinals, who had been pitching very well this season. The last couple of starts was roughed up a little bit, so he'll be looking to get back on track. But it's the last thing I want to ask you, as far as the division is concerned. I mentioned that the Cubs are continually the favorite to win the division at this point. Mm-hmm. But you've seen the Cubs, you've seen the Reds, the Brewers. What do you make of the NL Central this year as you go into yet another division rivalry series?
I think, like you said, I think the Cubs in the long run are probably far and away the best team, but I think one of the Cardinals or Brewers will probably push them for a while, just because it's like, it's hard to be mathematically out of it in, June, July. Last year, the Cubs didn't really start taking control of the division until like late in the summer. I mean, Pirates were always within, 4 games, it was always like one of those things. So I think, I don't think it's going to be like, oh, the Cubs are out ahead and now everyone's going for the wild card. I think the Cubs and one or two of those 2 teams will be probably neck and neck up until, August, September. And who knows, something catastrophic could happen to the Cubs. I know they have good depth though, but I do think those 3 teams are definitely a notch above. Honestly, I think the Cardinals are probably a notch above the Brewers, but we'll wait and see. And then the Pirates are either the best hitting team in the history of baseball or the worst team in baseball, or somewhere in between. We'll find out. I think they're the best. I think we're going to find out that's them. I would be surprised if the Pirates don't settle around 4th, but we'll see.
Yeah, I've said all season or all off season, I think it's going to be an interesting run in the division this year, because I think, I don't know that the teams that are good are maybe quite as good as they think they are. I don't think the teams that aren't as improved are as bad as maybe everyone seems to think they are. So I think it'll settle somewhere in the middle, and it could be an interesting ride. But this is, like I said, the first time that the Cardinals and the Pirates will see each other. Definitely some potential fireworks there. I feel like Polanco always has a good series against the Cardinals. Harrison, although he's not playing right now, is another one of those guys that I feel like inevitably when he plays against the Cardinals is going to have a strong series. So we'll see who it is that steps up for both of these teams this weekend.
That's certainly interesting pitching. I feel like I feel like the games 1 and 3, the Cardinals will certainly have an edge at pitching. Williams is pretty reliable, pretty standard average starting pitcher, but if it's Brault and Kingham, that could really get out of hand. So we'll see. Maybe they'll surprise.
Well, either way, an important series for both teams in the division, always getting those division games in early. I feel like the Cardinals have barely played anyone outside the division to start the year, so we're right back at it again this weekend, and I appreciate you taking the time to chat about it.
No problem. Thanks a lot.
For Cardinals fans, perhaps the biggest excitement of this series is the return of Jack Flaherty, the wonder kid who blew us all away in his first start on the season. In place of an injured Adam Wainwright, he'll look to do that again. But the Cardinals' offense needs to continue to score runs and continue to prove itself against teams that are not the Cincinnati Reds, especially teams within the division. Thanks again to Dan Hopper for giving us the Pittsburgh side of the story, and I'll see you next time for another series preview for Birds on the Black.